"No," he said. "I called 999 and the police came immediately, and they said it could be a bomb." I lifted the police do not cross tape and held it up as a handler ducked under with her sniffer dog. The handler was a young, uniformed officer, shockingly relaxed, and her dog was a brown and white Springer Spaniel that pulled on its lead, anxious to get cracking. "Good girl, Molly," the handler said, and we all watched the pair of them approach the lorry. The Canine Support Unit uses the kinds of dogs who struggle to get adopted at rescue centres. High-energy, endlessly curious dogs that don't know how to stop moving. The same qualities that are all wrong in a household pet are a huge plus in a sniffer dog looking for explosive devices. Molly sniffed the chassis of that abandoned lorry as if it was a long-stemmed rose. I held up the tape for them when they came back. "What does Molly think?" I said. "Molly thinks it's not a bomb," the handler told me. I scratched the dog behind the ears. "That's good enough for me," I said. I looked over at a slight, bespectacled woman who was standing with an armed officer whose face was entirely covered by a ballistic helmet and a balaclava. She was holding a skinny latte from the Bar Italia. Cops favour the Bar Italia because the coffee is so good and because it stays open for 22 hours a day. While he was holding a Sig Sauer SG 516 semi-automatic carbine assault rifle. The woman was my immediate boss, DCI Pat Whitestone, and the man must have been the commanding officer of CTU. I nodded, and DCI Whitestone acknowledged the gesture with a salute of her coffee. This was our case now. "Let's open it up," I shouted, ducking under the perimeter tape. A fireman from the station on Shaftesbury Avenue fell into step beside me. He grinned at me, bleary with exhaustion, and I guessed he must have been kept on after pulling the graveyard shift. Over one shoulder, he carried bright red bolt cutters, 4 feet long, and as we reached the lorry, he swung them down and set the steel jaws against the rust-dappled lock that secured the back door. He looked at me, nodded briefly, and put his back into it. The cheap lock crumbled at first bite. We both grabbed one door and pulled it open. I stared into the darkness and the cold hit me first. The temperature in the street was in the low single digits, but in the back of that lorry, it was somewhere below freezing. I climbed inside just as my eyes cleared, and that is when I saw the women. 2 lines of them, facing each other, their backs pressed against the sides of the lorry. All young, all silent, none of them moving, as though they had died where they sat. There was a thin coating of frost on their faces. Some of them had their eyes open. Some of them had ice hanging from their mouth, their nose and their eyelashes. The ice had stuck and clung and froze wherever there was moisture. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Some of them had their clothes ripped, as though they had been assaulted. There was no smell of death in the back of that freezing lorry, and yet death was everywhere. I felt myself sink forward, as if I had been punched in the stomach, and then I straightened up and turned back at the street. "We need help in here! Now!" Paramedics were already running towards the lorry. I stepped back to let them inside. I looked down at Edie Wren, her notebook still in her hand as she bent at the waist. Her hand pressed up against the shuttered window of the dim sum place, waiting to retch. Nothing happened. She straightened up and stared at me, her freckled face even paler than usual. We nodded at each other. I turned back to the paramedics. They were at the far end of the lorry, working back to back, each crouching over the woman closest to the cab. DCI Whitestone stood at the open doors of the lorry, staring into the darkness. She shook her head as her eyes took in the unmoving women, her gaze settling on their torn clothes. "What the hell happened in here?" Then Edie was by her side.